Those of you who've been playing Gran Turismo for many years, like myself, will of course remember how important of a place the Ford GT has always had in the series, from the GT40 to even the GT90. Of course in Gran Turismo 4 it became the cover car. I seem to recall it being Kaz's favourite car at the time. The Ford Gt Lm Spec 2, which of course we have now in the game in full premium glory. There was its kind of undervalued little brother, the wingless Gulf liveried LM, which I kind of preferred. Even now we have the test version of the Spec 2 as well, and last time around in GT Sport we had the road version of the new Ford GT added, the V6 engine car. And unless I'm mistaken, I recall that arriving quite late in GT Sport's life cycle, but I could be wrong. I think it did though. Now we have, of course, the next step, the racing version. Now this is a 2018 car, more of a GTE style approach from now compared to back in the GT1 kind of style days, which is what the Spec 2 was more like, up around 600 horses, 1100, 1150 kilos. This one does not match those numbers. And I would actually say that a crucial part of enjoying driving this car in this game is to have the right expectations. If you're newer to the Gran Turismo series, Sport or 7, I think you'll be fine. You probably won't expect too much of this car. You'll think, oh, that's a cool one, I'll try it out, I like the new Ford GT, and you'll have fun with it. For those of us who have those memories, though, of the cover car days with the crazy LM, you might expect this to be just a little bit quicker, a little bit more dominant than it necessarily is. And of course, with these Group 3s, Group 4s, balance of performance can change everything anyway, but we're just talking about as it comes out of the box. Now I'm driving this one completely stock, no changes at all I've done is the livery swap, and of course I'm driving it on Daytona. Now speaking of Daytona, there's a top tip, a little bit of a cheat sheet that I can give you, for those who maybe didn't already know, that you can technically drive this car as I am here, or at least on the same track as I am here, without even buying it. If you go to Daytona, the circuit experience is with a Ford GT. Doesn't have the livery, of course, because I bought this one, but you get the exact same experience as the one that I'm talking about. So you can decide for yourself what you think of it before you spend the million credits. A million is nothing special, of course, for Group 3, really. I mean, some are 450 grand, some are a million. It depends if it's newer, if it's real. It's still about what you'd probably expect to pay, though. But I could see some people finding that to be too much, given that, as I said, some are 450,000, so that is a fairly steep difference. And again, to tie that into what I said about expectations, the million credits doesn't really help, because clearly Kaz has priced it, or whoever priced it, has done so because of how iconic the Ford GT is to the series. In fact, I'm kind of surprised that this wasn't the cover car of the game. Maybe that would have been too Forza-ish, I don't know. But at least in terms of raw spec, you really shouldn't approach this car expecting, as I said, a monster. 527 horsepower is decent enough, but certainly not earth-shattering, and 1200 kilos is probably heavier than you may have assumed. Certainly heavier than the outgoing Spec 2 LM. Of course, one of the major changes is turbo aspiration with the 6-cylinder engine instead of V8 with a supercharger, so it is a very different animal. And even when it comes to the road car, it's night and day between the outgoing Ford GTs. You could even argue that this generation of Ford GT is the most different any Ford GT has ever been to the one before it. The GT90 doesn't really even count because they didn't build them, at least on a production scale, whereas the new Ford GT was very deliberately like a GT40. This is not. This is almost more like a LaFerrari or a McLaren P1 or a Jaguar CX-75 kind of approach, more digital than its outgoing analog forefather, if you will. In terms of performance, as weird as it sounds, there's actually not too much to talk about. I find it to be a very pleasant car to work with. The handling is smooth, the grip is good, the downforce is strong, the brakes are pretty good, and even though the power isn't earth-shattering, it's quick enough. And of course, balance and performance tends to even out a lot of that anyway. But I will say, when you first start playing the game, and I can still remember this when I first started playing GT7, the first time I drove this, I didn't really like the handling. Now, of course, physics have changed through different updates anyway, so that might have something to do with it, but I found it to be a little bit squirrely on the tail end, a bit slippery. I didn't find that at all this time around, so I think that's a combination of probably updates and also probably just being more used to the game. Speaking of updates though, this is one of a number of cars, in fact probably more than we've even realised, to have point levels that have changed due to updates. This one, when I first wrote down its specs, pretty much day one, had a performance point level of 734.85. Now it's 727.96. That's quite a considerable difference. I mean, that's what, 7 points-ish? That's quite a difference. It doesn't sound like that much, but that is the difference between having more or less power, more or less weight, within a certain restriction, say 700 points for example. And some of that most likely is to do with physics changes. Ultimately, I think many of you who do care about this car more than likely have bought it already. 1 million credits is more than some other Group 3s, but it's certainly not breaking the bank in Gran Turismo terms, so I think if you're interested, you've probably got it. So with that in mind, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you like the car? Do you use it a lot? Do you maybe not use it so much? And one of the problems with some of these day one cars that were new to the game, or new to the series, but not update cars, is I think that people can forget that they're in the game occasionally, and I could see that happening to this one because it's kind of tucked away in the Ford dealership and it's easy to forget about or overlook. But if you haven't bought it, if you maybe don't have the cash, jump over to Daytona, like I said, do the circuit experience and just see what you think of the car. Ultimately, it's a pretty nice one to work with and a pretty fairly balanced all-rounder in my opinion. Ultimately though, that's it for my thoughts. Of course, stick around on the channel for more, and until next time I'll see you then. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.